I kill monsters for an interdimensional government. Here are some stories. Part 1. Written by HHeyPeter. I think it's kind of hard to explain exactly what I do for a living in one concise and understandable sentence, but I'll try anyway. My name is Jamie. I kill various monsters, beasts, and various other paranormal beings on the request of my boss, who runs an interdimensional city under the all-binding fist of autocracy. If that sentence sounds like a confusing handful, it's because it is. I hardly even understand what I'm doing, and I've been at this job for months now. I'm not sure if I should be more floored by the fact that being a paranormal hitman is my first and only job that I've ever had, or the fact that my boss first hired me during a class of summer school gone horribly awry. I was 16 at the time of my initial employment, so I was a naive and foolhardy kid who didn't really understand the gravity of all that I was getting myself into, so I took the job without a second thought. So, if you notice any bad decisions or poor planning on my part, blame my naivete. Before anyone objects and says how inhumane and cruel it is to hire a child as a hitman, let me assure you that my boss takes the utmost caution and care that one can have while commissioning a hitman. I can personally attest that my boss is always looking out for me, one way or another. It's hard to explain, but I really trust the guy. He gets me, if you know what I mean. We have a personal connection, him and I. The boss initially hired me because I happened to perfectly fit the mold of characteristics and qualities that he looks for in the various operatives that he has around the country. He described me as brave and chivalrous when he scouted me, two descriptions that don't really seem like qualities that a hitman would have. But you really have to look at the bigger picture to understand my boss's mindset. I am being tasked with protecting the sum of the human population, essentially. The existence of the paranormal is largely unknown to the human race, save for a few shadowy government branches and my fellow operatives tasked with dealing with them. I hunt monsters for a reason, after all. And to better aid me with this job, I was given some nifty items and a particularly special ability to boot. As soon as I agreed to become one of his operatives, he gifted me with the ability to cause matter to decay at the cellular level with just a touch. A superpower my younger self would have gone nuts over. I'm expecting some questions about that statement, and all I'll say for now is that I had to find this power on my own. The boss doesn't like me asking questions about it, says that I need to find out for myself or some nonsense like that. I don't really get his train of thought, but I trust him to know what he's talking about. I discovered this power during my first encounter with the paranormal. I was being chased by the zombified corpse of a school faculty member. It's a long story. In desperation, I grabbed his neck to try and get him off my tail. But I found that when I touched his neck, my hands began to smoke, and I felt his neck slowly turn into ash between my palms. I prefer calling it a technique, but you can feel free to call it a superpower. I haven't exactly found a precise way to control it. It more so just activates whenever I want it to and when I'm touching something with my hands. As you can imagine, this has come in super handy on the job. My preferred method of utilization is to wait for my target to either be asleep or distracted. Then I disintegrate their throat via strangulation. If they can't call for help, then it makes my job so much easier, and I can eliminate them without the threat of being seen. Next, I aim for the eyes by poking them with my fingers. If the Odyssey taught me anything, it's that it's always easier to deal with a blind monster than one that can see. Now, I'm not implying that all of my targets even have eyes or throats to attack. I'm just laying out my preferred strategy for dealing with my targets. The ones that don't have either are far more challenging, but I've managed to deal with the few that come up. For the items that I was given, well, I got a whole goodie bag full of them. Night vision goggles, a med kit, a high-powered flashlight, and various other tools crammed inside of a backpack. Funnily enough, I've used these tools far less than I probably should on contracts. I would say that the flashlight comes in most handy, and maybe the goggles come in a close second. Normally, I would have kept my mouth shut and not let any of these details fly. But my boss said that it was fine to write about, stating something along the lines of, "Who would believe you anyway?" I can't really argue with that. So here I am now, sharing all my experiences and stories that I've had in my line of work over the past couple of months, all for your entertainment. If I manage to survive my upcoming contracts, then I might be able to keep updating them with new and exciting encounters with the ugly bastards I kill for a living. For today, I'd like to ease you guys and gals into it with my very first assignment that I was tasked with: the Dogman of Macon County. Now, if the name didn't suggest it, this was one mean-looking son of a bitch. Imagine a 7-foot-tall, burly man with the outstretched nose and snout of a canine, and who had glued the hair of someone's sheepdog to his skin with Gorilla Glue. Allow me to detail how I go about finding my targets. Firstly, I receive a letter in my mailbox at a random date with pictures, location, and a brief outline of whatever target I'm assigned to. I'm given a date that I need to eliminate the target by, and as long as I do so by that date, I get a sizable payment in the form of a wad of cash in the mail. It's strange to think that someone as influential and otherworldly as my boss would use the postal service to communicate with me, but I've learned that he has a certain fondness for this system, so I'm fine with him using it. These paychecks aren't cheap either. Despite being an otherworldly being with alien currency, my boss has a seemingly infinite amount of money to give me per paycheck, ranging from the thousands up to the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Initially, I received my paychecks through direct deposit, but I didn't want to make my parents suspect me of doing any illegal activity when I get wired a couple of grand seemingly out of nowhere. The picture I got of the Dogman was taken somewhere in the middle of the woods behind a tree, looking like one of those shoddy Bigfoot photos. Despite the poor quality of the photo, I could still make out enough details on the Dogman to make me shudder. I had until Friday of next week to take this thing out, but I didn't want to let procrastination get the better of me, so I headed out the day after I got the letter, bringing with me the med kit and the goggles I got from the backpack. I told my parents a lie about having a sleepover at a friend's house, and they took the bait and wished me a good time. As I said, I was naive and I didn't realize what I was getting myself into. So I never once thought that I could easily get slaughtered and die in the middle of the forest, leaving my parents with another dead child. The coordinates on the letter led me to Macon County, a small hole-in-the-wall community that looks like they skipped out on the technological zeitgeist of the 2000s. The entire community was a forested, rural area full of farmlands that stretched as far as the eye could see, full of browning magenta radishes, monstrously sized potatoes, and more livestock than one could ever need. Flocks of fluffy, plump sheep and herds of fat Holstein cows ate the bountiful grass and frolicked in the plentiful farmlands. Each house and barn in the county was made of dirty wood and crumbling brick and looked just a sneeze away from collapsing altogether. The most modern building that they had wasn't a drinking hole. It was an old McDonald's located near a farmer's market. So I paid for a large fry and parked my car in the parking lot. Once I got there, I resigned myself to playing the waiting game. It's not a fun game, but it's a game you gotta learn to play if you're trying to kill someone discreetly. Thankfully, I got to McDonald's around 6:30 p.m., so it would only take a little over an hour for the sun to set and then the moon to come up. So I sat snug in my car and munched on my over-salted fries. Once the sun finally set, I hopped out of my car and grabbed the night vision goggles and held them to my eyes to navigate the forest where the dogman roamed. Sadly, these goggles proved to be far less effective than they were made out to be. I really should have been suspicious that they looked more like a bulky pair of binoculars, rather than the typical military headset/optometrist machine cross that real night vision goggles look like, but I was hopeful. Looking through the goggles was like looking through an old video camera from the 90s. Choppiness, grainy textures, and motion blur all over. I could see my surroundings well enough, but it wasn't up to snuff. The temperature had dropped by 10 during my hour-long waiting game, but I had thought ahead enough to bring a coat. What I didn't think ahead to bring was any sort of weapon that would give me an edge if I had to fight this thing. I ended up picking up a big stone near a tree in case I had to put down the dogman and bludgeon him to death. Let me tell you, that thing can hide like you wouldn't believe. The only reason I even found the guy was a narrow, flattened makeshift path made from the scattered fallen leaves. I followed that trail and it led me to a small, cozy-looking cabin right in the middle of the woods. The county was fairly remote to begin with, but this was a step above that. Who builds a cabin in the middle of absolutely nowhere in a forest? Was living in this remote town just not isolating enough? I saw the scratched up wooden door in the cabin rattle from side to side. So I hightailed it back and hid near some leaves to avoid being seen. Out of the door came a sight that I will never forget. It was a bulky man who looked nearly 7 feet tall. He was covered in hair so coarse and thick that it looked like fur walking out of the cabin. He tilted his head left and right as if he were looking for someone. I was confused at first, but the gears were beginning to turn in my head. This was the dogman. He shared the thick hair and ridiculous height, but he lacked the canine face that the beast in the photograph had. And I knew why. This dogman was a werewolf. And right now, he was in his regular human body. I'm not implying that 7 feet tall is normal, but it's a lot closer to being normal than having a dog snout and stealing farm animals for food. The dogman went back inside his house and rattled the door again, locking it shut. As monstrous as my target looked when he was transformed into a furry, he was still human underneath it all. There wasn't a full moon out, so I guess it made sense that he hadn't transformed. My knowledge of werewolves is basically non-existent, but I think I understood the logic behind their furry transformation. I got up from my hiding place and walked towards his house. But I stopped dead in my tracks when I took a second to rationalize what I was doing. Was I really going to kill this guy? No, I had to take this guy out, monster or not. Monsters like him aren't supposed to be here. They're products of being exposed to the monsters roaming the city that my boss rules over. It's a long story. How one becomes a monster is through the various beasts and energies that leak out from my boss's city, Pandemonium. It acts as something of a port city between dimensions, so all forms of beasts roam the streets at night. The guards he hires to protect the city are kind of bad at their jobs. So he gets some people like me to mop up everything that escapes from the city to Earth. However, not all monsters are made like this. It's common for those escapee monsters to attack and spread their infection to regular humans in the population, thus increasing their numbers. I don't know if the dogman was an escapee or a victim of an attack, but it really didn't matter. He needed to die so I can keep the world safe and not let them find out the existence of the paranormal. The forest felt a lot lonelier and foreboding when I went over the facts. So I decided to check on the dogman through the window in his cabin. He was fast asleep, thankfully. Taking deep breaths, I crept up to his door and placed my palm flat against the door, slowly disintegrating the spot by rotting the wood. Once my hand passed through the other side, I reached my arm around the doorknob and twisted it unlocked, and I let myself in. The dogman was in a deep sleep, grumbling in a booming snore that sounded like he had an unhealthy amount of phlegm stuck in his throat, and it was trying to escape. I walked gently towards the bed he slept in, feeling the warmth of the crackling fireplace envelop my body from the chilly air. The cloak of darkness largely hid the house in shadow, but the fireplace put a spotlight on the cozy living room decorated with an antique oak couch with a bearskin rug underneath it. Considering who I was dealing with, I was sure that he had made the rug himself. The wall closest to his bed was filled with taxidermy heads of various animals. Deer, bear, even a caribou, all mounted proudly on wooden plaques. I stopped focusing on the details of the cabin and quietly marched towards the snoring monster, my rock at the ready. I stood over him and raised the rock high above my head, prepared to slam it down directly into his head. I won't lie. My arms were shaking something fierce and my breath caught in my throat. I was hesitating and unsure if I was really capable of bludgeoning this guy in his sleep. I tried to reassure myself that because he was asleep, he would be killed painlessly if I was able to crush his skull quickly enough. I'm not sure if I was breathing too hard or if this was fate getting back at me, but he woke up and groggily looked at me with tired eyes. After a second, he jumped out of bed with phenomenal speed and lunged at me, slamming me into the ground and making me drop my rock. I came face to face with him, and he was already starting to change into his werewolf form. In hindsight, I still don't know how he was able to change into his werewolf form so quickly, but that's neither here nor there. His face began to stretch and contort grotesquely. His nose began to morph into his face, which expanded like a fleshy Pinocchio snout. His pupils dilated and his teeth and gums shifted into sharp, fang-like teeth of a Rottweiler. Without wasting a moment, I jammed my hand into his face and tried to claw the spaces where his fur hadn't grown in yet. The few fleshy spots began to melt like peeling paint, and he recoiled, jumping off me and clutching his face with his claws, whimpering like a puppy. I rolled and got back up on my feet and scanned the ground around me to find my rock. Instead, I saw a rusty black fireplace poker leaning against the fireplace, so I grabbed the poker and dipped the top into the fire, letting the metal heat up. I spun around and charged at the werewolf, who by now had stopped clutching his face and was snarling at me. He had a look of utmost primal rage in his eyes, his human eyes. I lunged and swiped the poker across his face with as much fury as I could muster, slashing through his fur and flesh like a hot knife through butter. I popped his eye and singed the right side of his cheek, causing him to howl loudly. I recoiled and jammed the poker into his right foot, twisting the poker until I heard the cracking of bone. I wasted no time lurching at him, grabbing his thick, furry neck and doing my best to strangle him in time so that his throat would crumble away to nothing. My violent and sudden attack caught him off guard, and soon his dog-like whimpers became more and more muffled as my hands took hold of his throat, which was rapidly getting slimmer between my fingers. I felt chunks of hair and dust pass through my fingers as his cries became muted and his pupils dilated with the cold gaze of death approaching him. I had held on to his neck for so long that his head was too big for his dwindling neck to support, and it would have snapped at the slightest touch. I let go and his body slumped against the floor, blood pooling around his lifeless body. I felt a rush of adrenaline disorient me, making me lose my balance and tumble to the floor. I killed him. He's dead at my hands, I thought. It felt so surreal. Never in a million years could I have envisioned myself to be a killer, even if what I was killing was monsters. Everything felt so disingenuous, being a child hitman, killing people with superpowers and fire pokers. I would have laughed at the absurdity of it all if I was in a better mood. Something just didn't sit right with me. I came into this mission feeling righteous and cocky, but now reality crashed and I finally felt the weight's grasp on me. I could have died. It was blind luck and quick thinking that kept me alive, really. I came in with almost no plan, no weapon, and expected to come out victorious and unscathed. I mean, I did kill him and I came out virtually unscathed, but it all felt hollow. I was looking at this as if it was a game with clear-cut winners and losers, but I was deceiving myself from the truth. I'm a cold-blooded killer and I had just slaughtered a man. It was for a good cause, right? Who knows what kind of violent mayhem he could have gone on if I had not done what I had done. It's for the good of everybody, no matter how I feel, I thought. But I knew I had become accustomed to this feeling. This was the life I had agreed to. This is my career, my calling. I had no idea how the boss would react if I quit on the spot, nor did I really want to think about it. I got up from the floor and yanked the poker from the werewolf's foot. I disintegrated it, letting the dust fall to the floor. I wasn't sure where to go from here. Would anyone come looking for this guy? I knew the boss would gather the corpse and scrub any evidence of my crime, but he'd still be missing. I just prayed that he was living off the grid, isolated from the world. His house seemed to suggest that, so my hopes weren't unfounded. I left the cabin and made my way back to the McDonald's parking lot, using the night vision goggles to guide myself. I sat down in my car and let the events play in my mind again and again, soaking up what had just happened. I wasn't keeping track of time, so I had no idea how long I was sitting still. Only when a faint glimpse of the morning sun gleamed through the sky did I come to and snap out of my internal conflict. I turned on my phone and saw that my bank account had just received a direct deposit. I opened my app and saw that $7,500 had just been transferred to my account by an unlisted source. I still don't know how banks never caught on to the boss's direct deposit. Once I saw the money, I knew what I needed to do. I can't be this naive and foolhardy. I have to be ready. I need to be prepared. To come in armed to the teeth with weaponry, knowledge, and an airtight plan. That is, if I wanted to come out on top. The only bills that I had to pay is the car insurance, so I had thousands of dollars at my frivolous fingertips. I decided then and there that this paycheck would go to all the things that I needed to get an edge, that I needed to survive in my new occupation. I need to learn how to fight. I need weights to train with. And I need gear to cover my tracks. I felt a flicker of determination through my entire body, and I started my car. I didn't want to go home just yet, but I didn't feel safe being a sitting duck out here. This is my life now. I need to get used to this feeling. I promised myself that no matter how long I live, I will always remember this day and how it made me feel. And I've kept that promise to this day, and I'm in a more confident place because of it. Anyway, that's the tale of my first kill. If I manage to survive long enough, I'll add some more stories about my career. But they probably won't go in the exact order. Variety is the spice of life, you know? For now, I'm signing off. Have a good night, everyone. I'll make sure to report back in with a tale I'm sure everyone will enjoy. Cheers, Jamie.